Great Wednesday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host King, and I'm joined by my co-host Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
Doing well, King. Always good to be with you on a Wednesday morning, bright and early.
Absolutely, same here. And so, as we like to get things started, what's your spiritual energy number?
Yeah, I'm coming in at a 10. I've had some physical energy issues in the last few days that have kept me kind of tired and a little bit of pain, but I'm resolving those and choosing to show up with all of my best energy as a 10 today.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I join you in being a 10. Like you, I have definitely had some challenges going on. Uh, some health-wise, I had surgery on my foot last week, and then I'm still dealing with my back issue from my accident. But none of that deters me or derails me from being a 10. Because just as I can list things that can cause me not to be a 10, I could also list a longer list of things that help me be a 10 and that I'm grateful for. And I would just roll right into what my gratitude moment is, since I'm kind of in that space anyway. So I'm grateful for my life, my health, my ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have a sound mind. I'm grateful for another 24 hours to pursue my purpose in life. And I'm grateful for the challenges and problems I have in my life as they help me to grow and become a better person and see down the path of being fully human. I'm grateful to really just be in discovery, thanks to you and Kent, with the terminology of fully human, and how that just continue to, as I continue on that journey, how I'm looking at it and finding my way through it myself, and how I choose to identify as fully human. I'm just grateful for being in that space, and for the people who I connect with who align with it, even though they might not necessarily call themselves that prior to my conversation with them, but they lean into it once we have a conversation. And grateful for this podcast here with you and the infinite possibilities that this day is going to provide.
Yeah, beautiful. So um, I'm just grateful to be sitting here with the ability to do what I care about doing, that feeds my soul and occasionally puts some money in my wallet. But more importantly, just my basic needs are met. Um, I joke sometimes, but I mean it seriously. I've had indoor plumbing my entire life. I've had safe drinkable water my entire life, and I grew up with a refrigerator with food in it and a mother who cooked that food, and I now know how to shop and cook my own, my own food. Um, but all of my basic needs are met, and I just remain essentially grateful, effectively, eternally grateful for that. Um, and then for the most part, I've had, except for occasional hernia or hip replacement or skin cancer, I'm blessed with good health, and as far as I can tell, a functioning mind that for the most part still remembers things and can learn new things, and a circle of friends and colleagues whom I love and who, as far as I can tell, love me as well. So I'm grateful for all of that.
And those are things to be grateful for, my friend. I can definitely attest to that.
Yeah.
Well, great. Then we're off for a great show. Both of us vibrating at a 10, and we both have our gratitude moments out of the way. So with that being stated, why don't you walk us into our topic for today?
Yeah. So, we've been speaking, for anybody who might be new, I'll just real quick summary. Been speaking for the last, it's probably 3 years around today, because it was June of whatever year that was, 24, 2022, I guess, that we met and started doing this. Um, and we've been speaking about my 2022 book, Healing America's Narratives, the Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow. Um, and then more recently, we've made it was still underneath the umbrella of that idea of healing shadow. We've been speaking about my 2020 book called Enough with the Talking Points, How to Do More Good Than Harm in Conversation, which is part of healing. In other words, to be in good faith conversation, whether you're agreeing or disagreeing, and respecting your conversation partner, and not using generalizations and insults and predisposed judgments in conversation. So what we want to do today is really meets at the intersection of both of those. The ability to use language in good faith and in constructive ways with the larger intention of healing the narratives of the United States of America as it completes its 249th year in existence, if we count from 1776 and the Declaration of Independence, as opposed to 1787, 88, when the Constitution was ratified. So I want to focus today on the ongoing intention of the current administration, the Donald J. Trump administration, which effectively is practicing a regime change in the United States. It's trying to change the nature of the federal government. And one of the things it's doing as it executes the Christian right manifesto called Project 2025, which was written really as the manifestation of writing for the last 40 years or so, since 1980. One of the things they're doing is trying to eliminate the language of diversity, equity, and inclusion from the federal government and any entities, including law firms and universities, that have any interactions or get any benefits from the federal government. Effectively, that's what I just said is factual. It's going on. Anybody who knows how to read or listen clearly can see that going on. What I'll say next is my opinion on it. It's an overtly racist and homophobic move by a Christian right mentality that believes that this country should be white, Christian, and heterosexual. So that's my opinion, and I can point to all of the examples of it. But specifically today, we want to take a look at the arrests and deportations of people who look like they're not white and heterosexual, or at least not white. Primarily people who look like they are Latino. That's the primary target. And those who, based on what they've said out loud or written, are expressing views that are not in alignment with supporting Israel in their attacks on Gaza. More recently, anyone, including most recently the comptroller of the city of New York, so the chief financial officer of the city of New York, who's a Democrat, white guy, Senator Alex Padilla from California, a U.S. senator who's of Latino origin. The mayor of, and I'm forgetting if it was it Jersey City or Newark, I forget now, of New Jersey, who was a Democrat and black. And there are others. So American citizens who hold public office, all in the opposition party, the Democratic Party, have been detained and or arrested by ICE agents and then released. And there are many more. There are ongoing arrests of Latino men in Los Angeles who are American citizens, who were born and raised in Los Angeles. And they're being detained by ICE agents. So the federal government is using warrantless profiling to try to gather together and deport people who look like they might be undocumented immigrants. So that practice is what was practiced by authoritarian regimes, whether they were fascist, Nazi, or communist in Europe in the early and middle 20th century. So communist Stalin Nazi Hitler, fascist Mussolini as examples. So agents of the state would show up and arrest people for not being the kind of people that were wanted in the country anymore. Many Americans don't see what's happening as that. They see it as a disagreement between the Democratic and Republican parties, while their federal government is being severely changed for the worse for those who believe in citizenship and freedom. So it's a major, in some ways, coup that the MAGA Republicans under Donald Trump are operating. Even he was democratically elected, as was Viktor Orban in Hungary, and as was Adolf Hitler in Germany. They were all democratically elected. Putin was kind of elected, but it was a fixed election. Like, he's never really won a real Democrat election in Russia, and there won't be any more while he's president there. So what we're seeing is this movement towards an autocratic authoritarian ruler in the United States, and millions of Americans don't want to believe it's happening. And I tend to be a relatively kind of moderate person who's willing to call out the far left and far right when they say stupid shit, if you'll excuse my clinical language there. So I'm not an alarmist. This is happening right now in this country. What's already been done, I'm about 60 seconds from stopping talking here. What's already been done will take years to fix in terms of the changes in the federal government. I use government websites for looking up things on health and for looking up information on the Constitution and on civil rights and different things. And the things that have disappeared already, even about climate change, about science, they're gone from federal government websites, or they're severely redacted. This should concern anyone who enjoys even the smallest benefit from being a more or less free citizen in the United States of America, and who values freedom and who does care about the equality of all human beings. So that's happening as we speak. Sorry, I don't have better news.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, that's definitely the world we live in now. And, I would say from my perspective, the world we've been living in, we've kind of pulled away the blind, so to speak, and we can actually now see what is really still at the core. This is what, many people, many of the leaders within the Black community have been saying for years, and folks have been saying that's not true. And it's funny how some conservatives still say it's not true, that America's not racist, and Trump can have the gall to go after Chicago's mayor to say he's discriminating against white folks, so he's going to lock him up or bring charges against him, when no one in his cabinet, he has one black face. The only cabinet person he has on his cabinet, black person he has on his cabinet, is Secretary of Housing. Other than that, I don't think anyone else is black in his entire cabinet. So it's just, what surprises me though is how they still deny it. It's like their behaviors are clear. It's like, but they still deny it, so that I guess they can play the victim role, because they realize that as long as they can cry victim, then it changes how people see them, which for folks who are awake, it doesn't. And they even, to your point about your book, enough of the talking points, they've demonized the word woke. So now it's like folks who were kind of in the middle don't want to be associated with it being woke, where someone like myself, I'm proud to say I'm awake and woke, and that's how I think that we can begin to start claiming folks are really building alliances with people who are willing to say that and not willing to sit here and, and I've seen so many people. What's sad is it it takes Trump to this extreme to do these things to get people to say, "Oh, yeah, America still can be racist. America still has white supremacy." Oh, because as we've seen for since Trump's been in office, most of the time, that most of the demonstrations were again mostly white people. There were no police. There was no National Guard called in. There was none of that. Now, when you bring in black or brown individuals to protest, well, then Trump again is going to violate the Constitution and it's going to send troops in. State all the advocacy that the Republican parties do for state rights, all that stuff goes out the window. They have no policy, no platform. Their position shifts based off their agenda. They're for state rights when it suits their needs. When the Democrats are in power, then everything's about states' rights. Then when they're in power, then okay, well now the federal government has superior reach and can rule things. And Trump is the president is the end all be all to say they would never have that kind of mentality if it was a Democratic president in office. They'd definitely be screaming to the rooftops about states' rights and he's treading on them. All those things that we've been taught since I was a kid coming up, as far as the Constitution, as far as the Bill of Rights, or any of the systematic structure how this country is supposed to be governed. Is we're seeing that really has no true, I would say, that has no true control over what Trump is doing. It's like he violates the Constitution, and okay, well, what's going to happen? Judges say, return this person, even though Garcia's back in the country right now. But Trump took his time to do that, so he violates the Constitution on every end. And then the Republicans stand and defend that they have the Second Amendment. They argue about the Second Amendment constantly, but yet still they want to violate the First Amendment, which we see them doing on a regular basis. So what it creates is a media of chaos, where it's like what we thought was true or not true, or they tell us it's not true. It's like George Orwell's book Animal Farm, when they say all animals are equal, but some animals are equal or more equal than others. And that's what I see. Basically, they're saying with all people are equal, but some people are more equal than others. I mean, you can't be any more direct racist in their behaviors than what they're doing, other than just saying it. I mean, they would have the audacity to still say, "Well, we believe everybody should be hired based on merit," and then hire no one in this cabinet based on merit.
Right.
So it's like everything they say, they do the opposite of. And as you talk about these protests and what we're seeing, and this is what I was sharing with you before, the people I talk to, again, not speaking for all African Americans, but the ones that I've talked to, ones I've read about online, people who give their viewpoints, their perspectives, they've all said, we know that the minute we get out in the streets, that's when we're going to see the National Guard. Trump is waiting to call for martial law. He's waiting to do that. He's been waiting for the opportunity. And I remember back when doing Michael Brown's protests, and again, I'm from St. Louis, still a lot of family in St. Louis. And I remember when that was going on. And a friend of mine who's a videographer, and he makes little short movies and things of that nature, and he was documenting the protests, and he was talking about how the streets they were walking down, there was no violence. There was nothing going on. No one was burning. No one was looting. No one was doing anything. And he was talking about how the rumors through the audience or the crowd was talking about how there was these out-of-town agitators that was coming in, and they were trying to light fires. They were trying to, break in stores and do those things to create the chaos. And the Democracy Now! Was the only news site that I saw, a news media company that covered where that story of how these out-of-town agitators are coming in and Even Trump them even said, he says they're paid agitators. Now he's saying they've been paid by some Democratic individuals, but I disagree with that totally. Again, I think he's been honest when he said they're being paid, but who's paying them? I think that's when the lie starts. I think that's they've been paid by the Republican Party because it behooves Trump's administration to show violence, to show chaos, so they can justify their actions and play victim. Well, we have to do this, even though people will tell you what's going on in Los Angeles is nowhere near the level of violence that they try to show on the TV. Those same clips of the Waymo cars that are on fire, and people standing in the police cars. Yeah, that happened. I bet you they would interview those individuals. You would find out they weren't from Los Angeles either. And that's what I'm hearing. So I just want to say that's my take, my initial take on what you're saying, and just watching this country go into chaos. Now, the only good thing I would say about what's happening is that it's happening fast. And so, in other words, if you look at universal law, we have to reach a crescendo before the end of the year. Like, it's just things just happening. And it's clear that Trump is doing certain things to control the news cycle. And that's so obvious. Anytime that, the biggest news cycle was him and Elon Musk fallout, and Elon Musk accusations about what they were saying about him being in the Epstein files, which basically said he's a pedophile if you're on the Epstein's file list. And also saying about his big, beautiful bill failing and all those things. So what do? Now you manufacture a chaos situation in Los Angeles that need to be dealt with. I'm sending the National Guardians. Now that becomes the headlines. And so, and he's done that several times. Every time his administration gets called out for its incompetence, such as with Pete Hegseth did a tweet. On WhatsApp, and he put all the war plans in the WhatsApp and then invited. The stuff that you couldn't even dream of. If you were a Hollywood writer, there's no way in the world you'll say, okay, I want to try to talk about a breach of security. So I'm going to have the Secretary of Defense create a WhatsApp unsecured chat and put war plans and then invite the press on that. It's like, you're like, no, wouldn't nobody do that? No one's going to believe that. You can't write that. That's just too unrealistic. You can't expect the viewers to stretch their imaginations to believe someone will be that dumb. And then obviously he was. So now I say all that to say this, and I want to make sure I'm clear when I say this statement, that when I talk about my whole now understanding and belief and ideology when it comes to being fully human, for me to understand it better, I've come up with 6 core, I call them 6 mastery pillars. And the very first pillar of that mastery is identity, how you identify yourself. And if you identify yourself as by your race, by your gender, by your sexual orientation, by your political affiliation, by your ethnicity, by your career, your political affiliation, any of those things like that, then you're going to be very limited and biased in how you see the world, right? And when people identify by race, then you automatically see the difference in everybody else who's not of the same race you are. And then with the identity of the white race having changed throughout the years based again on political affiliations and agendas, that when you identify as part of the white race, then you view what's happening differently than people who identify and who don't identify by the white race. And you see that this is clearly saying that, going back to as I said before, the animal form, that some animals or some humans, either everybody's equal, some humans are more equal, white race more equal. And that's what we're experiencing. And so I sum up by saying, we knew that we got anyone who identified as non-white, got out into the streets, we were going to see mass protest. We're going to see a serious reaction from the administration that was going to be violent, where we're going to see violence. We're going to see, and we have to be willing to if we're going to get out in the streets, we have to be willing to put ourselves not only in jeopardy of being arrested. That's the easy part. You might even be deported. As an American citizen, I don't see who would stop them. You definitely get deported, and then people can fight the news about how to get you back over here and how that's wrong. As you talked about before, we've seen Democratic mayor of New York. Newark, New Jersey. He got arrested. They want to have a Democratic congresswoman bring charges on her for lawfully attending that facility. So we already know that they're going to really violate the Constitution if we get involved, and the consequences on us are going to be harsh. So again, if you're asking for that kind of sacrifice, what's the offer? How can we come aligned in order to fight against what Trump is doing? I know I said a lot of things all over the place, but to your point, there's a lot of feelings and emotions about what's going on right now.
Well, yeah, and what I want to respond. I want to zero in on one of the things you said early on in what you just shared, because I think I'm hesitant to say any one thing is the most important, but this could be. Back in 1951, Hannah Arendt published a book entitled "The Origins of Totalitarianism," and I'm just going to paraphrase it because I don't know it by heart. But one of the things she said in there, that the people who fell into fascism or Nazism, who were most prone to go along with what went on in Europe, weren't necessarily attracted to Nazi policy or to fascist policy, but they were people who were so exhausted by lies, by how hard it became to really understand what was real and what was fake, what was true and what was false, that they'd stopped trying. They just went along because they could no longer tell. And that's that's the Orwellian, both in Animal Farm and in 1984, where the double speak, truth becomes lies, lies become truth. That began. There's always a political spin. That's been since there were news reporters and since there were politicians. There's always a political spin. But opposing politicians, if you look historically, for the most part, agreed on the facts and had different interpretations of what to do next. Right? That's an oversimplification, but it's pretty much accurate. Donald Trump, in his mentoring by Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn was Joseph McCarthy's attorney back during the Red Scare stuff in the 1950s, when McCarthy was calling people communists and putting them on blacklisting actors and other politicians and all that. Cohen's approach, which he taught to a young Donald Trump, and this is factual. You can look this up. You can read about it. Was lie, repeat the lie. If you go to court and you lose, say that you settled and never apologize. Now you can see that's true with Donald Trump. It's been true throughout his career. He was involved in over 3,500 lawsuits before 2015. And if you look at people who are in similar businesses with even more success than he had, the top 5 after him combined had fewer lawsuits in their careers. Top 5 after him. I can provide sources for anybody that wants to know that. But more to the point, Trump just continues to put lies out there. He's done that since 2015 when he made his announcement to run. And for people who aren't inclined to be self-reflective or to critically think or to test different information sources, the amount of, as Steve Bannon referred to it, shit that's out there. They flooded the zone with shit. So it's increasingly difficult to really understand what's true and what's not true. There are tens of millions of Americans who think that that the country is invaded by illegal, basically Latinos, coming up through Central America, through Mexico, and into the United States, who are committing all these crimes. And the right-leaning media they'll repeat the same name of one guy who was an illegal immigrant who committed a horrific crime. But when a white guy who was a Trump supporter murders a Minnesota state representative and her husband and seriously wounds a Minnesota state senator and his wife, they don't seem to be excited by that. It doesn't seem to matter. When there are hundreds of school shootings and retail store shootings and concert shootings and nightclub shootings and festival shootings, the Trump administration doesn't care about any of that. Right? And the conservatives in general just support the Second Amendment, ignoring the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So what's out there is all of this nonsense where it really takes effort to get to the truth. Oh, when the New York City comptroller asks an ICE agent if he has a warrant for this particular individual, that's what happened over the weekend, or yesterday, I should say. And the New York City comptroller, whose job isn't about immigration, he's like the CFO of the city, primary financial officer. And he basically saw this happening, and he grabbed the young man's arm and said to the ICE agent, you can't take him without a warrant. If you don't have a warrant for him, you can't take him. And so the Trump administration accuses this New York City comptroller of assaulting ICE agents,
Right.
Interfering with the federal government and assaulting ICE agents. Now, he did interfere because the agents didn't have a warrant for this guy, but he didn't assault anybody. If anything, they assaulted him. But that's the kind of thing that's out there, and that'll be shown on Fox News and America First News and all the other shit that's out there. That this guy, interfered and assaulted ICE agents, and he's a guy in a suit. He's this guy. He's not looking to fight with anybody. He came out and he was disheveled. His tie was off, and he said, "Yeah, I think I lost a button," because they were dragging him. But that's kind of it's not comical at all. But those are the ones who were fortunate that somebody videotaped and it made it onto the news. I think of any one of these, and let's forget the undocumented immigrants for a second. Let's just take the American citizens, primarily who look Latino or are Latino, who are going to work and get accosted by ICE agents. And American citizens by law do not have to carry identification with them. We are not required to carry identification as American citizens. And if these young men can't produce proof of who they are, they're detained and arrested, despite saying, I grew up in East LA. I was born here. So what I ask people to do, regardless of their color, their ethnicity, their sexual orientation, imagine that you're going to work. You have your life. You rent somewhere, you own something, you have a family, or you live alone, doesn't matter. Maybe you have a dog, and you're used to going to work in the morning or going to school in the morning. You come home, and there's food in your refrigerator. Maybe you watch some TV at night. Maybe you read some books, listen to music. Whatever you do, we all have our kind of rhythms and rituals. All right? Imagine, because of the Trump administration now, you're on your way to work, on your way home, or you're in your home or your place of business, and armed men and women, some wearing masks, some identified as ICE agents, some in plain clothes, accost you and take you away. Feel what that feels like. And especially, I'm going to say, feel what that feels like if you're in fact an American citizen who has done nothing wrong, because that's happening now. Right? Then feel what it feels like if you are not an American citizen, but you're in the country illegally on a work visa, or you're here on an education visa, whatever it is. That's happening every day because Stephen Miller, who's the chief of staff, an assistant chief of staff for Donald Trump, has said we want to deport at least 3,000 people a day and at least 1 million by the end of the year. He came up with that. And if you listen to him talk, he's at best a misguided white guy who uses racist, sexist, and homophobic language at best. At worst, right, he's a white supremacist, he's a racist, he's a misogynist, and he's a homophobe. But he's the guy calling the shots as a chief of staff to the president of the United States. And a lot of people are suffering because of this. They're being taken away from their homes and their places of business without warrants. That's a police state. That's a military state. It's no longer a free nation. And if people want to make believe it's not happening, because the Trump administration spins it in certain ways, and it gets confusing, where what you see happening is different from what they're saying, you have an ethical obligation to yourself, your family, your loved ones, and everybody else who wants to be free in this country to find out a way to find out the truth and live in that truth, to stand up for what's true. And that requires some courage. So you find your courage level and you operate there. And maybe you hang out with some people that are more courageous than you are. Because it's not going to suddenly go away by itself. There are 3 years left in this administration. So it's really a time for anybody who, and you and I have spoken about the difference between my experience growing up as a second generation Italian American in New York, your experience growing up as a black man, St. Louis area.
St. Louis.
Yeah. So we had different experiences growing up for sure, but you and I have an alignment of values and attunement where we want this freedom and equality and good faith conversation for everybody. And for anybody that wants to still make believe that this isn't happening, that what happening now is not happening, God help you, because at some point they will continue to come for people who oppose them. And that's the mistake that was made in Eastern Europe in the 1930s and 40s. Nobody thought it could get that bad. Now, am I saying that the Trump administration is going to start killing people? No. Do I think that's impossible? No. But I don't think that's what's happening right now. But the freedoms that I grew up taking for granted, and that millions of Americans grew up taking for granted, that allowed Clarence Thomas to become a Supreme Court justice, that allowed Ruth Bader Ginsburg to become a Supreme Court justice, Thurgood Marshall to become a Supreme Court justice, and Samuel Alito and Neil Gorsuch and the rest of those people. Those aren't being honored anymore because some people want the country to be a certain way. And it's dangerous times. So the language thing is a big deal. It's hard to see the truth. It is confusing. You have to do the work to find out what's true. And it's not easy. Read Václav Havel's The Power of the Powerless. He was the president of Czechoslovakia, and he was a poet and a playwright, became the president. Read Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny. Both of them are pretty small books, but educate yourself because it's happening here now.
Well, definitely have some comments that I want to throw back at you on that. I think you're absolutely right what you laying out. And I definitely want to piggyback and show some comments. We got some viewers as well. We're going to piggyback on both of those on the other side of our break. Want to show our break for our sponsor, and then we'll get right back to the show after that.
The playbook for growing a local business online is simple.
King, if you can hear me, the sponsor ad got interrupted. So those of you who are enjoying this, we'll wait for King to come back and let him know that the ad began and then stopped. So I see a comment in the comments as we're waiting for King to return from Brooklyn Bree. I'm not sure how to say that. Says, why do you think they were dragging him? He was very aggressive. If you could tell me what you're referring, who's the him there? Because I'm not sure exactly when you posted that. Might have been the New York City comptroller. Is that whom you're referring to?
Thank you. Oh, sorry about that.
King, the
my
ad
apologies.
the ad
Ran
didn't-
to an issue.
Yeah. But you know the ad didn't run.
I'm sorry.
You know
Ran to the emergency issue. I'm sorry. What did you say?
the ad did not run. It began and it stopped almost immediately.
Oh, my apologies. We're live too, so
Yeah,
forgive me
so
for that.
I was just talking a little bit, and I saw one of the comments here that I asked for some more information. I'm not sure if the person
Did you share the comment?
Yeah, it's actually that comment, but I'm assuming that he's referring to the comptroller of New York.
Right.
But I'm not clear when it says he was dragging him, because I gave a couple of examples of people being arrested. So I'm not sure I understand that question. But I did respond in language. I'm not signed into YouTube right now, so this response comes from YouTube, and they're telling me to sign in to YouTube.
All right. Well, I'll go back on the screen if you want to reply. But before you reply to that, I just want to give my perspective on what you were saying. Because before we went to the break, or attempted break, I should say, you had mentioned the fact of, imagine being in a situation where, because you talked about how in America we don't have to show our ID. It's not by law. And what's interesting, when you said that, I thought about, again, it goes back to animal farm, that some animals are equal, all animals are equal, but some animals equal or more than equal than others. And growing up in St. Louis, even though the law states that you don't have to show your ID, it's been a lot of times when we were pulled over by the police and we weren't the drivers, we were the passengers. And the police would ask all of our IDs. And when we refused by saying we don't have to show our ID, that would lead to getting arrested every single time.
Yep.
Right. So from our perspective, we don't really have to imagine that far. That's not such a large stretch of our imagination to picture that. So then you think about the fact that you can go to prison without, just by the police feeling that they have a reason to lock you up. And if you don't have the money to get out on bail, you're just going to be in prison if you're poor, you just don't have the ability to pay the bill. The judge sets the bill to be, even if you're not poor, but he just sets the bill to be excessive. You're not getting out of jail until that's covered. So you're going to be in jail based off without even being convicted of a crime. So we're used to that. That's not something we really have to stretch our imaginations on. But I think you bring a good point to the fact that we got to begin. And that's why I was really stressing the importance of identity at the beginning. See, I think America is still so trapped in this identity politics and seeing and defining us by identity based off superficial constructs that don't really matter. See, what I'm advocating is that we identify as human beings. And if you identify as a human being, then you see another fellow human being, regardless of the color of their skin, regardless of their sexual orientation, regardless of their political affiliation, their religious dogma, regardless of any of those things. You see a human being being assaulted by ICE agents or by the police, you stand on that. You fight for that injustice. That's another human being being done that way. And that's how I believe we have to begin to really start responding. We have to begin to the point where if we really want this world, and particularly our country, to operate in a way where justice is equal to all, that everybody is truly equal, not equal outcomes, but at least equal opportunity, and that we all are free to live in this country, and all of us are treated fairly and equally under the Constitution, then we all have to fight that everybody gets that, not just, again, knowing that, well, yeah, I know that racism exists within the system, but since it doesn't affect me, I'm not going to fight for it. And that's kind of been most Americans' mentality when it came to these things. Yeah, one minority group might be screaming for years, this is what's happening. We're being treated unfairly. It's like, oh, that's bad, but it doesn't affect my day-to-day, so I'm not going to do anything other than say that's bad, and I'm not going to support it. But again, like I saw on a poster outside one of the buildings where my office is, inaction is supporting that action. You know, and when you really adopt that mindset, then we can bring about change. But I wouldn't be surprised if Trump's administration actually did kill someone, because I was looking for, and I went to find, I saw an article that someone referenced on YouTube, and I haven't seen it myself yet, where he updated new executive orders that gave pretty much ICE agents the ability to just do whatever they needed to do to get their job done. And they can interpret that to mean that, again, that situation with that comptroller. Now, again, the comptroller happens to end up in a situation where it's a black comptroller, and the ICE agent may actually decide to shoot him, or, you know, you never know. And I can see that happening more than I can see it not happening. That's what I'm saying. And I can see the Trump administration saying, well, you know, they resisted, or they assaulted the ICE agent. They prevented the ICE agent from doing his job. And I clearly stated that if you get in the way of an ICE agent doing their job, these are going to be the consequences. And they will lie, just like Chrissy Noem lied when the Democratic senator just spoke at her press conference. And then she claimed that she didn't hear him identify himself as a senator, and that he wouldn't have got arrested had he identified as a senator. Where it's on camera where he's identifying, I am a U.S. senator. So they claim that these laws and rules are in place, but they're not going to adhere to them. They're not going to be governed by them. They're going to do what they want to do, and they're going to deal with the consequences later. And the question is, at what point, and this is why I stated earlier, that at the end of the day, black people and brown people, as well as gay people, any marginalized group, is not going to bring about the change. That's just going to be a fact. It's going to take folks who are of the right race to stand up and do it, because the pushback is going to be less, consequences is going to be less on you all as far as what's going to happen than anyone else stepping up. And not just that, but no one from a marginalized group really has the power. Now, we can align and we can show up in numbers and make the numbers grow to show that kind of strength. But outside of that, no one's really no marginalized group is in any kind of position of power to bring about any kind of change at all, other than hope and pray and support as best we can. So I really think that, again, I've said it several times, I'm going to constantly keep saying it, we got to get to the point where we can really get the conversations going as far as to say, what is the world we want to look like, and agree upon what that's going to look like, and then say, now we're aligned on that goal. Now let's begin to all move towards that goal. But I think that until that's clearly stated, I just think that what's going to happen is going to continue to happen until something, unfortunately, is going to happen that's going to be so shocking that it's going to, like, if you go back to civil rights movement, we saw what was happening with the police dogs and the water hoses all that time. And it took the 4 civil rights workers going down to Mississippi and then being killed and disappearing. It took something that traumatic, that horrific to happen to really bring, okay, now we got to do something. Now we got to begin to really put some action behind these hopes and dreams and these aspirations. So unfortunately, that's what I see that's going to be next, is what's going to be that triggering, traumatic, horrific, violent act that's going to be so appalling that that's going to make everybody say, okay, that's enough. Now we have to either lock Trump up, do the courts to really pull him back, impeach him, or whatever the consequences is going to be. But I don't see that happening until that horrific incident happens. So, and I pray that I'm wrong. I pray that I'm wrong.
Yeah. What's I don't disagree with that, and I pray that you're wrong as well. What terrifies me about that is that we've been so desensitized to horrific incidents. In other words, why wasn't the intentional murder of a Minnesota state representative and her husband, and the attempted murder of a Minnesota state senator and his wife by a man who had a hit list of over 40 names, which were, people who were in favor of DEI or Democratic policy, whatever. In other words, it was a hit list against Democrats in Minnesota. So it's not like, okay, he was mentally ill, he just started shooting random people. This guy was going after certain people. So in the United States of America, and this is something that I've wrote about for years, I still do sometimes. Right? 20 first graders wasn't enough at Sandy Hook, plus 6 educators. And I don't know the numbers of all the other ones. All of the people killed in Las Vegas at the country music concert. All the people killed in the Pulse nightclub, which was basically a targeted attack against gays. The people killed in Colorado Springs, targeted attack against the trans community. Even though lots of people in the audience just go to enjoy the show, and the guy that took down the shooter was an Army veteran who was heterosexual, was married, and he was there with his wife and daughter. And then, in every community, so many communities have their stories of this. None of that has yet been horrific enough to get this entire nation to confront the reality of our violence against each other. There's racial violence, there's homophobic violence, but then there's just violence.
Right.
There's white people killing white people, black people killing black people. There's young people killing old people. I mean, it's just there. And what this country does, state by state, is, I forget the numbers now. I'm pretty sure it's 26 states have open carry laws, where you have your gun and you can just keep it in your car and put it in your holster and walk down the street with it. And then others have concealed carry laws. So we're arming ourselves because we're afraid that a bad person is going to get shot. And the more guns we have, the more people are getting shot anyway. So it's a real exercise in idiocy.
Well, you speak of a good point. I think that's what's going to end up eventually maybe bringing the situation to a head. Because, like as you said before, and we've seen on TV, a lot of the ICE agents are not in uniform. They have masks on. So you don't know what their role. It just shows a masked individual jumping out. You believe you're being kidnapped. And so now to your point about open carry states. So if I got my gun and I'm walking down the street and somebody jumps out of a van with black mask and try to grab me, I'm shooting.
Yep.
Right. And I should be lawfully able to do that. Right. So, but of course, under Pam Bundy's law, I'm sure that I'll be wrong because now I've attacked the ICE agent. And what's crazy is the ICE agents don't have to identify their ICE agents. They could just go about their normal duties and execute what their plans are. And we're just supposed to accept the fact that these are ICE agents who, or hope they're ICE agents, and hope people not being kidnapped. And, you know, so for me, that's the part that's extremely scary, right? And to your point, yeah, violence has been a part of America's DNA just as much as we like to say the Constitution is. It's just a fact. It's been violence since this country was, before it was created, since its creation, and doing its life, it's been American and synonymous with violence.
Yep.
But when it comes down from our government, and maybe that might be what the trigger is, like when the ICE agent steps over that line, you know, like we saw with Rodney King and the police, and they beat that man on camera for a good 15 minutes and tased him, and a jury still found the need to say, and they acquitted him. Yeah. Because when people have again, identity locked in on my race, we feel in fear. I can relate to that fear. He was speeding. And we saw from the guy who put the comment, why do you think they were dragging him? Which his comment was, why do we think they were dragging him? He was very aggressive. In other words, from reading that comment, he's trying to say, well, they were kind of justified in dragging him because he was aggressively trying to fight the ICE agent, regardless of how aggressive the ICE agents are. So that's not what he's considering at all. How aggressive were they with snatching and grabbing an individual? So, and then you could always find folks who could always find reasons to justify why some kind of ICE agent overreacted, how some police officer overreacted to justify their actions, or even Trump's administration's racist policies. I believe that through this storm that we're going through right now, and I believe it's going to get worse before it gets better, but I truly believe, because I've seen a better world, I've experienced a better world of people that I talk to on a daily basis, where I can just hop on a Zoom call with a stranger based on a LinkedIn profile, and we can get on a phone call and actually begin to start building with each other and truly communicating with each other, regardless of the fact that this may be a white woman in Albania or a white man in Connecticut or a Muslim man in Detroit. All that doesn't matter when we see ourselves as human beings. And that's the world that I try to really focus my attention on. And that's where my belief and that's where my faith is, that that's on the other side of the storm. But right now, we have to go through the storm, because I believe people have to get so sick and tired of all the things you said before for them to get to the point where they said, I am willing to sacrifice my comfort, my job, my way of life for a better world. And I'm willing to put that on the line right now. Until people get into that position and that mindset, then I think that we're going to continue to stay in the storm.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it requires some courage, and the idea that it doesn't affect me yet, so I'm not going to worry about it. Whoever that me is, that's, and then that gets back to identity again. Like, my bias, the way I express the identity thing is, it's all about me, or it's about my group or groups, or it's about all humans, or it's about the entire planet and everything on it. As long as you're at that me-centric thing, well, these policies don't affect me or my family yet, so I don't really care. You're part of the problem, because eventually there's a chance that they'll be coming for you too. I mean, again, and history has shown that if you look at Eastern Europe in the 1930s and 1940s, nobody believed it was going to get as bad as it was. Nobody saw Hitler for who he was. And again, I want to just be always clear that I'm not comparing Donald Trump to the idea of killing millions of people. I'm comparing to the tactics of dissolving the rule of law and have the rule of law become what the president or the dictator says it is. And that's what's currently happening now. And there are enough people in the United States who are willing to go along with that, it seems. And very few of them, in my experience, are gay, black, brown, or women. There are probably a lot more white women who go along with it, I admit that. But because they had, they've already tasted the discrimination. Most of the people, and I like what Ta-Nehisi Coates says, and he got it from James Baldwin, most of the people who, quote, think they're white, haven't really faced that kind of discrimination in their lives. So,
yeah, absolutely. One last thing I just wanted to point out before we get ready to wrap up, because we reached our top of our hour, and I know we're getting ready to wrap up, is that we have to get to the point where kindness is our default setting. Yeah. When you get into IT, everything becomes what's your, you're setting your default setting. What's your monitor default display going to be? What's your phone default ringtone? I always ask people now, what's your default setting for when it comes to, what do you default to when there's uncertainty? Do you default to anger or do you default to kindness? Right? And I've gotten older. I want to deal with people who default to kindness. And I just want to end my closing statement on this conversation is this. And I quote Frederick Douglass: as a fully human being, I will unite with anyone doing right. I would not unite. I would do nothing with anyone doing wrong. I think I just butchered that. Let me say that again. I would unite with anyone doing right, and I won't do anything with anyone doing wrong. So what that means is, regardless of the color of the skin, sexual orientation, gender, income, if you're doing right, I'm working with you. You're my people. And that's my identity, and that's what I stand on that. So with that being said, Reggie, why don't you go ahead and give us some positive things and some action steps that we can now take to help people navigate, again, this chaos that we're currently dealing with right now.
Yeah, probably the most useful thing that's relatively, it's deceptively easy. It's not that easy to do is commit to learning what's true. Again, Havel said living within the truth, or living in the truth. And nowadays, because of these things and social media and people not getting their news from legitimate journalists, but getting it from online sources where you can't tell what's true or not, what's a troll or not, and our gullibility as human beings, as people who want to believe what we already believe, do the work to get to what's true in any given story. Right. And you have to do some work. You have to do some digging. And, the irony is, there's the paradox. It's easy to do the work because, when I was in college and my first 20 or so years after it, I had to, read real newspapers. I had to listen to the nightly news, and I couldn't just access it whenever I wanted. With the newspaper, I could. Now, snap your finger, you have access to everything. But there's so much junk there. You've got to, kind of tease it apart. You've got to do the work of finding out what's true. Who is trustworthy? Who's an investigative journalist who can speak to this particular issue? Who was there, or, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Journalists are really important. they're different from media personalities, very different animals. So, that's the thing. Commit yourself to the truth. Don't just follow your gut instinct that says, well, that's what I already believe, so it must be true because they said so on Fox News or MSNBC or whatever the other, news stations are. Read long form journalism. That's the best thing right now because we need people who are willing to commit to living in truth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Those are some wise words. And I agree 100%. Thank you for sharing that. One of the best things about our show is that I know that on every Wednesday, you and I are going to have some real discussion about what's really going on and how to really continue on that path of being fully human. And with your experience and your writings, you definitely help continue to put forth the process and the instructions, or I should say, outline the path to getting on the path to be fully human. So thank you for that. And as we close out, I'm sorry, were you going to say something else, Reggie?
No, I just say thank you. You're welcome, and thank you for creating this platform and for engaging in these conversations. It's a team effort here. So I appreciate what you said, and right back at you.
Absolutely. In our last section of our show, we like to, again, make sure that folks know we're not just speaking about some unrealistic expectations of being fully human. So we want to highlight and give flowers to people who either from the past or the present who actually are living what we embody what we consider fully human characteristics. And so with that being said, I'm going to say that my person today that I'm going to choose is a gentleman by the name of Whitney Young Sr. And Whitney Young Sr. is the father of Whitney Young Jr., who was the president of the Urban League during the 60s and during the Civil Rights Movement. But Whitney Young Sr., my reasons for choosing him in particular, and I created, again, a framework which to identify people by being fully human. Not that a person has to fit all 6 of these. It's great they do, but just some of these characteristics, because again, at the end of the day, we're human. And so as human beings, we're going to have mistakes. We're going to have things that people don't always agree with, or misunderstanding, or parts in our lives that may not be in line with who our purpose is. And that's the benefit of being fully human. You can get back on that path. So just quickly, his identity, he was president of Lincoln Institute. It's a segregated African-American school in Kentucky that he created. He embodied identity rooted in educational leadership and racial uplift. Now, what's so impressive about Lincoln Institute, and I'm going to really shorten this for time's sake, is that Lincoln Institute was a school that taught engineering and science, and he got predominantly white donors to support his school, Lincoln Institution. But here's the thing about it that was interesting, is that he told his white donors that it was a janitorial school. It was designed to teach janitorial and help men who were at that point transitioning in from coming up from the South and transitioning in from the I don't want to say the term plantations, but sharecropping duties, helping them transition from sharecropping to janitorial work. And so what he had to do was that when his donors would come to the school to see what their money was being used for, he had all the students stop all the engineering activities, put them in the closet, put on janitorial outfits, and play the role of janitors. Because he knew and understood that even though the white folks were giving money to empower them, he wanted to still keep them within a box. And he knew that if he didn't do that, he wouldn't get the funding and he wouldn't achieve that goal. So he was able to successfully play that role of helping them change their clothes each time, and was able to send several different young men and women on to careers of science and engineering. So he was a person that identified as a human being, fought to work with white people, work with to fight for the upliftment of people that he saw were being unjust and being harmed. So again, to me, Whitney Young Sr. is my example of a fully human today.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that story. Bait and switch. Yeah, it's for janitors. That, um, so I'm going to honor someone who is just somebody I know personally. Haven't seen the person in a couple of decades probably now. But when I worked at Iona College in New Rochelle, New York, worked there for 7 years. I ran a building, and it was a residence hall. And the custodian there was a gentleman by the name of Joseph Ulrich, and Ulrich, I think is the way he said his last name. He's Haitian, and he would get there like 5 o'clock in the morning, and his basic job was to clean, vacuum the floors, clean the bathrooms, just keep the inside of the building looking respectable. He worked for the facilities management department at the college, and I learned that when he left every day, he went down the road to New Rochelle Hospital, where he did basically the same type work. He left around 5, I think, from the college, and worked till about 10:30 or 11 at the hospital, cleaning and mopping and everything like that. And so as I got to know him, I tried to help him as much as I could, mainly by telling him that when the students made a mess or did something stupid, that they would clean it up. In other words, he had some basic things that were his responsibility, but when there was horrible things that the students did when they were drunk or stupid, leave it there. I'll take responsibility for it, and the students will clean it up. So he appreciated that. So I left there in 1994. Probably 10 years later, I went back for an event at the college, maybe 15 years later. I'm not sure exactly the years. And I'm walking down towards this building, and I see this guy was a little bit more weight on him than I remember. But we look at each other, and I said, "Joseph?" He goes, "Reggie?" And so we like hugged each other, right? And what he had done he was going to retire at the end of that year from Iona. He'd worked there for 20 plus years. And he had things I didn't know. He had lived in Manhattan, and he put his 4 sons through college. And he was just this good guy. He just got up every day, went to work, not particularly glamorous work, doing his custodial work. Was always fine to interact with me. We had, I would say we had a friendship. He actually bought me a gift when I left the college, which I felt guilty taking, but I didn't want to insult him, so I took the gift. I still have it. And he did the college, did the hospital, went back and slept for 4 or 5 hours in Manhattan, got back to the college each day, and put 4 sons through college. And he was so proud of that when he told me. Like, it was almost like his eyes filled up, and so did mine. So I just, I hope he's still alive and enjoying himself somewhere, because he deserves the rest. But that's Joseph Ulrich.
Absolutely. Well, Joseph Ulrich, I didn't know you before, but that's a wonderful story, Reggie. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
And we've gone over quite a bit, but again, lately that's maybe got show hour and a half. We'll look at that going forward.
Well, but, we need to better organize ourselves, one or the other.
Yeah, one or the other. Absolutely. Well, again, Reggie, thank you for being present. Thank you for being a fully human that you are, choosing a topic, for living a life. And I want to thank our listening audience as well for listening to this show, whether it's live or you listen to the replay of the show. And let's all continue to work towards being more fully human. Until next Wednesday at 10 a.m. Thank you.